Today, I turn it over to someone who I think is really one of the great New Thought metaphysical speakers in the world today. And we are so grateful. I'm grateful that he's my friend, even though we sometimes stand on opposite sides of an opinion. I'm so grateful that I have such respect for this man and that this used to be his home center. And it always is, and it always will be. So please welcome Reverend Dr. Jim Lockard. Thank you.
Set timer for 24 minutes. And I've been having some memory issues and I may forget to stop. I want to begin by saying Dorianne is not with me today. She sends her love. We did a memorial service with the family for her dad who passed away a couple months ago yesterday. And so her sister's in town from Oklahoma and our daughter Grace is here, so the three of them are having a day together because it's been a long time since we were all in the same place. And I'm with you. So the idea of gratitude as a creative energy is really something I learned in this teaching, in the science of mind. It was something that had never occurred to me up to that point, when back in the late 1980s when I came into the teaching. The fourth step of spiritual mind treatment is gratitude. And it's not just gratitude for, it can include gratitude for what has already arisen. And gratitude as, of course, is something we want to grow into. But it's really gratitude for the realization that what I'm treating for is already so. And the way that is creative is it helps us to create a consciousness of perfect expectation that the treatment that we're declaring is already done, and now it just needs to manifest through whatever laws are applicable. So when the first step is recognition, where we recognize the nature of spirit, and we affirm that so that we remind ourselves that we're part of a universal intelligence that allows and expresses by means of us. You are an actualizing mechanism to take potential into actuality or into realization. That's what we do. By means of our own individualized intelligence. So the second step of treatment is the recognition that I am one with this creative energy. I am naturally a part of it. I don't have to do anything differently to be creative. It's my nature. To be creative as me, as a human mind that is a subset of the universal mind. What I have to do is get myself out of the way of the creative flow so that it can flow through me. As Emerson said, get your bloated nothingness out of the way and let the divine circuits flow. Let the divine circuits flow, because that's the nature of spirit, is to create. What stops us from getting what we desire is our own mental attitude of limitation that we have developed faithfully from generation to generation. And other things like trauma that upsets our capacity to be a clear channel. So healing is about removing those kinds of obstructions from our creative flow. And the third step is where we realize or declare our intention of what we choose to manifest. It might be perfect health. It might be wealth. It might be a relationship that would be improved. It might be my own sense of being able to understand myself as a clear channel of this process. And the fourth step is gratitude. And when I do my prayers, my treatments, I usually include a gratitude that the science of mind has come into my life, that I'm aware of this creative process and my role in it. But I also declare that I'm grateful that what I have just declared is already so. And the last statement is release, which is really a commitment to turn it over to that creative process and not undo it by worrying about it after the treatment. And it's also an intention in my mind that every time I think about the issue I've treated for, I go into that positive space of expectation. So gratitude is a key element in maybe making the difference between a limited belief and a larger acceptance of what is already so. Our role is to allow the creative energy to flow through us, but we direct it. That's why we're individualized. We're not all one blob of humanity. You see? So my job, my role in the universe is to be the best version of me that I can be, the most authentic. Now, who tells me what that is? Well, nobody can tell me what that is. Others can guide me toward a realization of the idea of that, but I have to realize myself who I came here to be. Carl Jung called it the soul's agenda. The soul being the deepest part of you in consciousness that is you. And if you go one step below the soul, you're in the universal mind. Ernest Holmes called it the individualized self. You see, where you become you. But we're still you and I are still connected to the universal. It expresses through us and as us. But if we've kind of jumbled up our consciousness with a lot of stuff that just ain't so, then that universal awareness, that intuitive knowing, can't get through. How can I become a clear vessel for the greatest truth of myself to express in the world? How can I tell I need to do that? Well, my life isn't working well. That's how you tell. Life leaves clues. But it's not my fault that things aren't working well. It's my parents. It's the government. The Trilateral Commission. You might have to look that one up, but I wouldn't recommend it. See, when we say it's not my fault, it's their fault or his fault or her fault, what we're doing is we're using our power to displace our realization of our power. So the opposite of gratitude is resentment. See, it's easy to be grateful when things are going well, right? When your soulmate has just shown up before they've begun to disappoint you. When maybe there's a little extra money in the paycheck, or someone gives you a gift. It's easy to be grateful then. But when somebody else gets the raise that you thought you should have gotten, or somebody else gets the soulmate that you had your heart set upon, or the soulmate says no, it's easy to feel resentment. We have names for resentment, envy and jealousy and things like that. And there's a wonderful saying that says he or she who experiences resentment, it's like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. See, because resentment is corrosive in consciousness. It occludes the spiritual channels that the life force flows through. And we begin to see the world through very small eyes. Gratitude opens that up. See? Gratitude is love. Resentment is fear. Fear constricts. Love expands. So part of being grateful means I have to let other people live their own lives to a maybe greater extent than I'm comfortable with. See, for many of us, the biggest issue in our lives is, who's the matter with me today? You know, when you see somebody going, being angry at work, okay, who's the matter with you? You see, and when somebody said something or didn't say something or didn't do something, or it's the other political party, or it's the government, or it's somebody, or it's God, right? If everybody else would just think the way I think, everything would be okay. I tried that approach for a number of years in my life. Nothing seemed to get better. You see. We have to accept that, there's a term in New Thought we use, in one of the organizations uses, their goal is a world that works for everyone. A world that works for everyone is going to work differently for everyone. I just wrote a blog post about this last week. And it's not that that's not a good idea, and it's not that, but the thing is, when you start talking about utopian ideas, that everything would be okay if only, it tends to get you to a place where if only everyone would do what I agree with. It's like people that say they talk to God. God always agrees with them. I've never heard anyone say, oh, I talk to God and I have to turn my whole life around. See? Because they haven't talked to God, they've talked to themselves. And I generally agree with myself, don't you? See? So the discomfort often comes in realizing that I've turned down a blind alley in my approach to life, and there's no getting out unless I back up, and backing up is going to be very painful. I may have to not look as effective as I'd like to look. I may have to end some relationships that are toxic or have become toxic, and I may have to realize I'm the toxic factor in the relationship. So gratitude comes in a recognition that, or gratitude is valuable with the recognition that if I'm grateful for the whole process, I'm much more likely to end up where I need to be my authentic self. Now, the other question is, how do I know what my authentic self is? Because we kind of have two main layers in terms of how we understand ourselves. There's, let's just call one the ego layer, that's more close to the surface, and the other one that's soul's agenda, or the divine, the higher self. Let's call it the higher self. And the goal would be, the idea would be to be more and more connected with the higher self. See? Now, the higher self is never jealous, is never envious, never wishes harm on anyone else, never needs to be seen as better than anyone else, never needs attention that they're not getting. So as you hear things like this, you may say, I haven't been in my higher self a lot lately. I've been in my egoic self. My egoic self is scared to death of being seen other than in a certain way, of needing things to be in a certain way so that I can not be upset. The higher self is not just tolerant of difference, it celebrates difference. My mother, who had a pretty good self-concept and was a very important teacher in my life, one thing she would do, and I've said this before for some of you, but when she went to a party or a gathering, she would look around and said, who is the least like me here? And she'd go up and talk to them and introduce herself. And she did this all over the world. She married well in her second marriage and got to travel. And they would, so she had, and I said, what would happen if they just ignored you or said they didn't want to talk to you? She said, then I'd look for the second least likely person and go talk to them. She said, it's their loss. And she had people that corresponded with her from literally all over the world. And at her funeral, hundreds of people showed up. When you were in my mom's orbit, you were cared about, you were recognized, you were heard, you were fed, and you had an ear that would listen to you and who would call you occasionally if she hadn't heard from you, like all my old girlfriends. Where there weren't that many of them, but But see, how many of us would say, okay, who is most likely, if I go into a room full of people, who is most likely not to upset me? Where is there going to be the least amount of friction? Who's going to be the most comfortable person to talk to? That's ego need. And we're all going to be in our ego from time to time. It's not like you're going to erase it. You can't, people say get rid of your ego. You can't. Your ego is like the skeleton of your psyche. It's like the girders in a building. And if you took your skeleton out of your body, you wouldn't get around much. Right? If you took the girders out of a building, it would collapse. But your skeleton will support your body in pretty much any form that you decide to put your body into, except let you know when you're doing it in an unhealthy way, right? But it will adapt, it will grow, it will change. Your ego does the same thing. Your ego will support whatever consciousness you have accepted for yourself, and it will tend to make the world look like you're always right. I want to be grateful for that too. I want to be grateful for being completely baffled by things. I want to be grateful for becoming more willing to look foolish. Because that's the ego, doesn't want to look foolish. Okay, don't give anybody an excuse to put you down. See? Or the ego can also be the element that says, don't let anybody see you. The higher self wants to come out and have a party. The higher self wants a fiesta. The higher self wants to explore and have as much experience as you as possible. It will not let you comfortably stay in egoic fear. It will continually nudge you forward. So what do? We self-medicate to numb out. We drink. We use drugs, prescription drugs or whatever. We create social structures where we know that never will be heard a discouraging word unless that's all I'm interested in hearing. Rather than go through the pain of letting the authentic self come through and having the ego release its claw marks. Because the ego will not go quietly. If New Thought has done a major disservice over the years, it has been making it look too easy. It's not. But there's nothing else to do if you want to live the fullness of life. Do the shadow work, do the deep questioning. Be willing to listen to people you disagree with without needing to judge them and make them wrong. You might realize after the conversation you want to avoid them. That's fine. But be that person that's there. Tell me more about yourself. Tell me more about why you think the way you do. Tell me more about your pain. And if I can help, I will. My philosophy of life as I've gotten older, now in my 8th decade, which means I'm in my 70s, not my 80s, by the way, for those that weren't math majors, has been I want to live a good, full, enjoyable life, but I want to contribute. I want to be there for people. I don't want an ordinary job anymore. Did that for 5.5 decades. But I want to be a contributing factor in helping where I can help. So I write my blog, I write my books, I coach, I do some other things, but I'm retired, so I have a lot of free time, which I enjoy, and I enjoy being in France, and I enjoy the relationships I'm able to have there and connections here and so forth. And I say that not so you'll envy me, but so you'll say, what would it look like for me to have that experience of life? I remember as a ministerial student, I went to see, a bunch of us went to see Michael Beckwith down at Agape speak. And I had never heard anything like Michael Beckwith. And I'm sitting there thinking, because you think about, okay, what can I gain here? What do I need to do to... And I thought, well, I can't talk like Michael Beckwith. People would think I'm pretending to be black, and I'm not going to get away with that. But what I came to realize was, listen and pay attention to the energy, and what is my version of that energy? See? The passion, the preparation in being able to say things with some degree of wisdom or intelligence in a way that people can hear and be moved by. If you're not moved, you're not going to change. See? And sometimes we don't feel like being moved. Yeah, I'm miserable, but if I change, it might get worse. That's a direct quote from my father. I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm serious. He was willing to settle for a level of misery because he wasn't willing to take a chance that things would get worse. So he self-medicated until he couldn't anymore. And he bitched and moaned the rest of his life. I remember living in Florida, and some people go there to retire, and there are these big, huge retirement communities where 40,000 people live, and there's a lot of bitterness there in that community, in those communities. I remember there were cases. They all have golf courses, and there was a fellow that had a heart attack on the 17th fairway. It's true, and he died. 6 foursomes went through before anyone told him in the clubhouse that there was a guy having trouble out there, because they didn't want to be late for early bird dinner. Now, I was young enough when I saw that, I said, I don't want to be that when I get old. You ever imagine yourself in your 80s or 90s? What do you want, this is important to do. There's a good example right there of someone that's doing it well. It's important to do because I don't want to age haphazardly. I certainly don't want to trust, anybody else's advice beyond what I can figure out. I trust my body to know what I should eat and what I shouldn't eat. I don't go to Facebook for medical advice. But it's important that we say, I'm visualizing myself at an age, whatever, an advanced age, and I'm visualizing myself being as robust as possible, recognizing there's going to be some changes. I now have 3 sets of prescription glasses for 3 different distances, and a 4th set of sunglasses that are prescription, and I'm not wearing them now, and all I see, this side's pretty good, this side's kind of blurred. I have hearing aids. I have tinnitus most of the time. It's great for meditating. Just focus on your tinnitus. I'm healthy in the sense that I'm not on any medications. I'm able to exercise. I'm able to, pretty much eat whatever I want. You may know I like wine, and so forth. And I went to my 50th high school reunion 3 years ago now, and 25% of the class were dead. They were on the in memoriam board, and I thought, that's crazy. And I went and looked it up, and that was right where the statistics said they should be. And there were another 25 that couldn't come because they were too ill or infirm. And I don't want to cast aspersions on any of that. I don't believe all that's consciousness. I think at least some of it's genetics. But it's also, consciousness is certainly a big part of how I express myself as I go through these different times in life. And I want to be grateful for aging. And I am. If somebody said, well, if you go back and be 20 again, would you? I don't think so. I don't think so. I was pretty stupid then. And reckless. And I was not compassionate very much. I'm sure I hurt a lot of people that I'm not even aware I hurt. I think the idea of saying I wish I was something else or someone else or somewhere else is ultimately a losing game. And to wrap up, think of gratitude as an action. Think of it as a core component of your psyche, of your mental and emotional processes. Throughout your day, figure out times to say, okay, why should I be grateful for this? With the default answer being you should. Even if it's negative, even if it's painful, because I'm grateful because it's taking me somewhere. You know, Joseph Campbell talks about the idea of the spiritual warrior, which is the fully realized being. The spiritual warrior says yes to whatever is in front of him or her, because if it's in front of me, it's mine. I drew it in, I manifested it, and in some cases, I manifested it so I could overcome it, so I could transcend it, because something was being called forth from me that had not to that point been called forth. That's what grief is. Grief over a loss, whether it's a person or a place or a thing or an era or a memory. Grief is the process of letting go of something you love, so that you can move forward, not to never grieve again, but to move forward into a new wholeness that includes that structure of what was and what is no longer. So, love only, forgive everything, big part of gratitude. Remember who you are, and be grateful for every bit of it. Thank you, and namaste.